Today we will be reviewing Ampersand's Aquaboard. Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Alisa of Alisa Laporte Art. In today's video we are going to review Ampersand's Aquaboard. I will leave a link to this and all other materials in the description below. Let's open this up and check it out. Aquaboard is a particle board sprayed with an absorbent clay surface. Patented sealing and coating technology for panels, only by Ampersand. And it says it's uniquely absorbent, absolutely archival, acid-free texture clay surface, absorbs watercolors like fine paper. So this is the Museum Series panel 6x6. It says that they have a commitment to the environment, that their panels are made from sustainable forest products that ensure the protection of wildlife, plants, soil, and water. And it's made here in the US. So let's open this up. So we have our 4 boards. You can see the particle board there and the canvas side. Smells like canvas. And it has an Aquaboard stamp on the back. Okay, so here are my 4 panels of Aquaboard. Now, mine didn't have a piece of paper, but I did look up a little bit about Aquaboard online, and I did see that you need to wet the whole board and let it absorb some of the water before you start painting on it. Otherwise, air bubbles come up through the paint and it'll leave a bunch of little air bubble marks all over your painting. So I'm glad I looked that up, because I mean, I guess unless you're looking for that effect, I would be careful of doing that. So we'll move these ones to the side here. It has a fine tooth surface that's in between hot and cold press. It's got a little bit more tooth than our hot press, but not quite as much as our cold press. So this will be different. We'll see how it compares. I mean, it's not paper, so we'll see. It's probably gonna be something completely on its own. Keep getting stuff on it. I think I might do a fox of some sort on this board, just because it's kind of got, the fox has some fall colors. They're beautiful creatures, and it looks fun to do. I'm trying to think if I want him and how I would want to draw him, or if I like this one looking out. Okay, let's see how we draw on this. Seems to be okay. The picture I used for this painting is from Pixabay, which is a royalty-free site and has some great reference photos. I found that the Aquaboard is easy enough to sketch on. Just make sure your lines are clean and aren't too dark, because once you wet the surface, it will smudge the graphite.
Order in a cup of love, feel it rising up and above. You will always keep my heart and soul strong. Plant your seeds in.
After I finish my sketch, I need to prep the surface by getting it wet. I want the water to absorb into the plaster just like I would with my paper if I were doing wet on wet. I don't want it to be too wet, nor do I want it to be dry when I start adding pigment.
You're the first thing in the morning and the last.
After wetting the surface of the Aquaboard, I quickly learned that I would need to be extra mindful of my values. As you can see, it has a more gray or yellow tone when wet, and it stays that way until it is completely dry. Something to be aware of.
Water in a cup of love, feel it rising up and above.
It looks as if it's starting to dry a little bit, so I'm going to add some quinacridone gold as the first layer of its coat. I don't want the surface to completely dry during this whole painting, as I learned that if you paint wet on dry, it will create little bubbles in your paint. I want to add a wash of burnt sienna. It has an orangey tone that is perfect for a fox. Throughout this painting, I am testing out how my watercolors react to the surface as well as each other on the board. I noticed the paint doesn't blossom out like it does on paper. It can be wet and the paint will stay where you add it instead of filling in the space like it does on paper, which allows for a little bit more control in some ways. I'm definitely going to be using a different technique than I'm used to doing, and that's okay. That's what makes this fun and exciting. It gives us a chance to do something a little different, a little bit out of your comfort zone, which is what helps us grow as artists. You might notice as I'm adding this black that it really is not blending out like it would on paper, and that's kind of what I'm meaning. I have to kind of go back in with fresh water and blend it out myself and really use that control to get it to where I want it to, which can be a negative and a positive. I really like the flow of watercolors, how they just blend and mix on their own. And this, for now, takes away a little bit of that loss of control, that blending and mixing as watercolors naturally do. I really feel like I have to push and move the watercolors to where I want them, and I struggle with getting them to do, I guess, what I want them to do, which is to behave and intermix and create something that maybe I didn't know they were going to create. And so I change up my technique here, and I decide to go in with some mingled washes, variegated washes. And I think I really like that I changed that technique of what I was kind of just going in and putting the colors and really trying to make everything uniform. I just tried to force the watercolors to lose control in this painting by doing those variegated washes and really just dumping a lot of pigment with a lot of water on there to create some unique textures. And I end up really loving this effect, and the fact that I was able to go in and kind of white out some areas, which is not something I would be able to easily do on paper. I was almost able to just start fresh, and it didn't muddy the way it would have on paper. And I just love that and found that so fascinating that it's almost, you know, you can erase things just to a certain extent. You still have to be careful, and it still has some staining qualities, but you're able to almost erase things a little bit more than with watercolors. You just have a clean brush and clean water, and you can just white it out and then blot it with a paper towel. This is a very forgiving surface. If you remember in the beginning me talking about the gray tone to the surface when wet, I knew that it would throw things off, but it became more frustrating than I originally thought it would be, because I was thinking, I know this is going to happen, so it'll make it easier. Did not make it easier knowing that. It was so frustrating at times because I would think, okay, this is white, but it didn't look white, so when I would put something next to it, you know, that I wanted light, it looked the same value, so you felt like you needed to push that value even darker when you really didn't. So that is something that I found as a little bit of a con. I did experiment with the background and some of the fur to get some water textures like Ali Kavanaugh does in some of her artwork, but I think I need to further test and experiment with this technique. Another thing I would like to further test out is how smooth I can get this surface. I have the feeling that I get hard edges where I add new paint, and once one color is down, it's hard to blend it with another. Another thing I really have found that I love about this board is how much you can layer. On paper, we all know that you can do so many layers before you'll start to get a muddy effect, or it'll change the texture of the paper and it can just become ruined. This I was able to do in some areas 10, 12 or more layers, and it didn't change the board. It didn't change the texture. It didn't get rid of the plaster that was there. So if you like to do a lot of layers, this is definitely a way to go because you're able to do that so easily. Another con, at least for me, I felt like the paints dried much lighter than they do on regular paper. So there is a lot more layering involved in this. Like I mentioned, it does layer well, so that is fine. But you need to take that into consideration when you're doing your painting. I thought I had some really great darks, and then I left and let it dry, and when I came back, the darks were not as dark as I had thought they would be when they were done. So, just another thing to be aware of. As you might have noticed throughout this video, the fox's eye has been giving me some trouble. And that's been frustrating for me because I love the eyes, and the eyes are partly what really make, a figure or an animal come to life. I just could not get the detailing that I normally get on paper. And that was very frustrating. Though I did like that I could kind of wash it out and start over, which I did, I think, 2 or 3 times. And I finally got it to where I liked it. So I moved on to all of the detailing, which was a very different process with this board. Like I said, you can layer on top, but I felt like a lot of it just sits on. It doesn't blend the same way. And when I would try to blend it, then it would just kind of get the layers sometimes wet underneath and then blend it but create a new little blossom of its own, which was fine. And that's why we're experimenting with this, because then I can know how to really go in and utilize this board to the best of its abilities, because it's not going to react like paper because it's not paper. So it will have some differences to it. And this painting really helped me understand maybe more what techniques I will need to use with this board. I will definitely have to use a different approach. I did like that I could go back in, and for my highlights, I just used a clean brush and white it out where I wanted some of those highlights. That was really nice to do, and it made it look soft and nice, whereas on paper sometimes when you try to do that, it can leave harder edges or not really go as you want it to. So I did appreciate that about this board a lot. I think that was the number one thing I really liked, was how forgiving this surface was. Another thing I noticed as my paints began to dry was the background specifically. I noticed that the granulation from my paints was more prominent than it normally is on paper. I loved the texture that it brought to my painting. Don't worry, it didn't happen with all of the paints on this painting. It's not the board itself that makes granulation. I just felt like this board really made the granulation more prominent than it has on paper. I don't know if it's the texture that's there plus the plaster, because like I said, it kind of made a lot of the paints dry lighter but I felt like the granulation was stronger in this. I liked that, but you would have to be more aware of which paints in your palette granulate than not, if you don't want that granulation there, or if you don't want to do a painting that has granulation, because not every painting do you want to have granulation. Now about these whiskers, I felt like they were too prominent, even using my smallest brush. So I narrowed them by using clean water and rubbing out the thickness of it. This is not something I could normally do on watercolor paper, as it would either leave marks, you would have to really brush, and you would almost have to brush out the entire line, wait for it to dry, and redo it. This was very easy to do on this paper, and it did dry without leaving weird marks near the whiskers, and I was able to get them pretty thin, so I was very happy with that. Here I'm going to touch up that eye one final time before I add a few more details and finish it up. Always remember to sign your name at the bottom. Right or left side, it doesn't matter. Usually it depends on your composition. That wraps up this video for today. I hope it helped you in your decision of whether or not to buy or in how to use your Aquaboard. Do you think this is something you guys would use, and what would you paint on it? Check out my video on how to cut down large watercolor paper in the link below. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about my sketchbook tour coming up. I'll see you in the next video.